It's starting to seem like Mick Cronin is finally acknowledging his need to play Aday Mara just a little bit more, and the Bruins might win a lot of their games coming up.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of Locked On UCLA Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever it's your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Go to check it out on FanDuel.com. And where we get started today is Mick Cronin, during his presser, was asked some interesting questions and also brought up some interesting points about how UCLA, the men's team, they're 6-0 when Aday Mara plays 20 or more minutes. All right, 6-0 when Aday Mara plays 20 or more minutes. Interesting. Well, if you play him more minutes, and he's played half the game, and UCLA wins all those games, wouldn't you think that UCLA has to keep the guy on the floor? Well, Mick Cronin, I'm not sure if it's a cop-out, his reasoning, which could be fair, we know UCLA has dealt with this, was the illness that plagued the Bruins. Remember, they had suspected norovirus sweep through the team after the big win against Michigan State. Michigan State went through the same thing where they got sick when they got back home, including Tom Izzo. Mick Cronin got sick. So the big thing is UCLA has gone with Aday Mara a lot more since the Wisconsin game. But then Cronin seems to keep pushing it off to Mara still blowing his boogers during practice, keeping the snot-filled, tissue in his shoe, practicing, not throwing it off, and just competing. His level of defense has gotten much better, which is also a big thing. So one, Cronin keeps pushing it towards a lot of the reduction in minutes has been him being a little under the weather / he's not fully conditioned, right? He was taking a long time to get conditioned for this season. He had an off-season foot injury, so Cronin had him lifting weights. Now, when he finally breaks out in a big game against what could be a top 10 Wisconsin team, top 15 Badger team, then it just kind of falls to the wayward side. Now it seems like there's been enough time for him to get over the norovirus that apparently turned into a respiratory thing. And hopefully, now that March is around the corner, you get all the cold, all the viruses, all the sicknesses that are going around, and get it out of your system, get out of it. So for Mick Cronin, it's now time to lean on your 7'3" Spaniard. UCLA needs to utilize their bigs, whether it's William Kyle or Aday Mara. Now, the clear-cut favorite, obviously, is to use Mara. But then, if you want to go somebody at the 5 to take time for Mara when he's off the court, go to William Kyle. I don't understand why UCLA does not use both these guys more, right? Cronin is acknowledging they are 6-0 when Mara plays at least 20 minutes. At least 20 minutes, okay? Now, what is it going to take? Cronin acknowledged he wanted Mara in the game versus Bilodeau versus Ohio State. Mara, despite not his best offensive performance, having to be physical, having to battle in a game where, nobody was really getting buckets, he came through and really impressed. And the biggest acknowledgement was that Mara's defense was the reason he kept it. And sometimes you're like, Mara just standing there is important. No, Mara defensively against Ohio State was very important to UCLA, to the point where we saw limited run time from Tyler Bilodeau, and UCLA has not at any point this season, outside of Bilodeau literally being injured, gone away from Tyler Bilodeau. They have gone with Bilodeau, and that has come at the expense of playing minutes to Eric Daly. When you have Mara out there, they haven't found a way to use Mara, Daly, and Bilodeau at the same time because they just quite simply can't. This time, they went with the hot hand that was Daly Jr., and then Bilodeau turned himself into the guy sitting on the bench with Mara out there. I'd like to see a way where all three of those guys can play the same minutes and that the consistent rotation involves Mara, Maybe you go Daly Jr. and Bilodeau to start. Okay, you save Mata for a little bit later. You have that special unicorn type player coming off the bench. And then you go to Kyle to get an energizer type player playing defense after that. And then it's going to be tough for teams to score in the paint, to get rebounds. And if Mata's getting buckets, UCLA is going to be tough to stop in the paint when you can go get an automatic deuce whenever you have the ball in the post. It's not been guaranteed when they have Mata, but they're going to get a foul call, build up the fouls against, and that's going to lead to more free throws. Not that we want this team shooting free throws, but generally for most teams, when you get the right free throw shooters up there, they are going to convert, and there have been games when UCLA is converted from the charity stripe, just not in the clutch. Overall, Mata playing more minutes is something that's been begged for, asked for by just about every segment of the UCLA fan base, sports writers, beat writers, myself, you guys listening / watching at home. We're all like, where is Mata? And at this point, it has to be, he must be healthy, all right? Now, I got a roommate who's still coughing, and it seems like he's sick all the time. So there's some people who take forever or take a long time to recover from something that might be a respiratory illness or something, some sickness. It just takes a little different for somebody to get their strength back, to truly get their win back. If that's been the case for Mata, and that's why Cronin's holding him back, let him go. This is the time. He's got to build it up, because UCLA must lean on him literally to get through these big games in Big Ten play at Purdue, Northwestern, USC. Same thing when you go in the Big Ten tournament. Absolutely a must in the NCAA tournament, where if UCLA goes on a run, the golden boy, the poster child for the UCLA run is going to be an Aday Mara. He's going to be the fan favorite. You're going to see a lot of Spanish media if that happens to be a run for UCLA. Of course, this is a full supporting cast where you're going to lean on, hey, more big-time threes. The big shot from three is probably going to come from a Sky Clark. You're going to see Bilodeau come in there. You're going to say that his dad was a hockey player 30 million times over the next few weeks. Okay, we get it. But you have to lean on more Aday Mara minutes. Even give you some minutes in William Conn. Not to steal from Mata, but if you take him out, doesn't mean you need to put Bilodeau or Daly Jr. right in there. Let Kyle go in there and be the defensive weapon he was brought to UCLA to be. Okay? And then UCLA finally, after what's taken since November, 3+ months turning into a 4th month eventually, to realize their full potential. And if there's ever a chance you want to get hot at the right time, realize your full potential, it's a Mick Cronin coached defensive unit like UCLA can be, with them reaching their full potential, no true road games, limited travel or extended travel in the NCAA tournament, as opposed to this game, that game, every game in the NCAA tournament. You don't have to do that like it is in Big Ten play. You're going to have generally similar rest. You mix in Mata getting more minutes with the things he does offensively, passing, shooting, fouls drawn, defensively, just a statue in the post, rebounds, all that. And then UCLA is going to become one of those dark horses that could make a deeper run in the tournament if Mata gets more minutes. And if it's only because he's been getting sick and just not necessarily fully 100%, every time he's out there, he is making things happen and disrupting the other team on their own offensive possessions. Every time. Even if he's not playing well. And that is a difference maker. And sometimes you have to coach kids up to play defense. And sometimes maybe UCLA, in their year of international recruiting, despite what we want to say was a failed season, despite a lot of these players leaving or not panning out, maybe the 1 out of 6, the 1 out of 5, the 1 out of 4 was a super gem waiting, a diamond in the rough. And Aday Mara, that when and hopefully he comes back for his junior season, will be a breakout star. Because remember, it didn't take Zach Edey half a season to figure it out. It took him a little bit more, and then he became the National Player of the Year. Now, I'm not saying that's what Aday Mara is going to be. It's a little foolish to say, but some of the better players, the big men, the youngsters coming internationally, whether it be from Spain or Canada, it takes them a time to get adjusted to college ball at that height, to get to the demands, get to the strength needed to play this game over and over again. And Mata is nearing where he can be a true contributor, which he has been in his sophomore campaign. All that in a full offseason more, and he is going to be special in his junior season. Absolutely special. But who could join him in that junior season? And is it a source of concern that Mick Cronin doesn't have a lot of talent bringing that's being brought in next year. We'll talk about that next on Locked On UCLA. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, and so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for an even bigger payout, you're like, man, let's dial it up a little bit more. You can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay, whether it's using the live betting feature to keep you engaged in late-game rallies or picking players to hit a clutch three. All you got to do is use an app that's super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, cruising on, second segment. Let's talk about what this team is supposed to be like next year. What does this team bring in for UCLA back in 2025? There's expectations, there's portal projections, and then there's the class of 2025. Let's start with the class of 2025. UCLA has nobody signed in the class of 2025. That is something that is rather unique, that Mick Cronin did not sign anybody in the class of 25. He had somebody signed super early in last year's class, Eric Franey, and he was told to redshirt. But in the class of 25, UCLA has just not hit on any recruits. They lost one they thought they had in their own backyard. In Nick Kamenia, there's been some big names that have gone elsewhere. The biggest uncommitted guys are Braden Burries, basically in UCLA's own backyard, and Koa Pete. And now some of those are top-notch, high-end, 4-star, 5-star players. And is it really fair to say that guys that are cool on the UCLA recruiting efforts or maybe committing, regardless of when this podcast was recorded, those are the guys that I just checked, uncommitted at the time I looked. It's not likely that those guys are coming. Burries is a target for UCLA. He's going through his high school playoff run. Last year, the Bruins in the class of 24 got a steal getting Trent Perry late. And even then, you see how many minutes he's getting, how many minutes Eric Freeney's getting. How does that make UCLA a desirable location for current 2025 recruits? Well, the Bruins, heading into this next 2025-2026 year, are going to lose Kobe Johnson and then Lazar Stefanovic to graduation. All right, those guys are out of eligibility. They didn't go play JUCO ball. They're not going to sue, make it a Diego Pavia rule. I don't think the NCAA is going to turn it into a 5-year thing next year where they're going to sue and come back. I just don't think that's going to be the case. Anything weird, they're going to lose the starting three, right? Their starting three guard, which is Johnson and the backup and a guy who could start elsewhere in Stefanovic. Okay, so the ideal candidate, you get a guy who could be a small forward like a P to a 6'8". Braden Burry's undersized for what Johnson is, but can maybe fit in nicely. And you're like, okay, is it bad that UCLA doesn't have a commit signed? Optically, given the illusion to the fan base that we're doing nothing, is not entirely true. Remember, UCLA can bring everybody back but Johnson and Stefanovic. That means Sky Clark, another year. William Kyle, another year. Aday Mara, another 2 years. Okay. And we're like, Bilodeau, another year. You're like, oh, this is interesting. Dylan Andrews, another year. And you're getting guys that are starting to build senior campaigns. Trent Perry, who in my mind, along with some of these other guys, could be candidates to transfer. In my mind, these are who you could come back with. Dylan Andrews, Sebastian Mack, who I think we all want to see be a 4-year Bruin, at least a 3-year Bruin, mixed with Sky Clark, be a 2-year Bruin. All those other transfers into this year, be 2 to 3-year Bruins. But where the transfers and who could UCLA lose out on, Trent Perry, who hasn't been utilized, right? Now, can he come back and improve? Certainly. But some guys don't like being used rarely, seldomly. And that's where Trent Perry's roles become. Cronin even said it in the post-game presser recently. We need more Trent Perry minutes. Well, why don't you give them to him? He's bigger. He's faster. He's bigger than some of the guards and probably plays sometimes in his best moments a little wiser with more dynamic potential. at this moment, he hasn't cracked the starting lineup. And if you don't like the Cronin method, then they're usually out right away. So Perry is an obvious target for potentially transferring out. And that's not rumblings I'm hearing. I'm not saying that's going to happen. But anytime you've got a true freshman after last year's true freshman class all mostly left, he has got to be in that name for, okay, it could happen. Just like any of these guys, it could happen. Daly Jr., Bilodeau, any of these guys, it could literally happen. That's what makes the portal a blessing and a curse. Somebody throws a little more money, you get more opportunities elsewhere. That's why any of these incoming guys, even if you brought them in now, you're not going to keep them potentially for another year. 2, Dominic Harris, a name we've forgotten about. He was a key get coming from LMU, 14 points per game, a third best three-point shooter in the country was Dominic Harris. Nowhere to be found on this year's team. Hasn't really panned out for him. I would think if he has the credits, he finds the opportunity, he's going to bounce back to a Mountain West team, mid-major program, maybe a team in a lower level part of these super conferences. And Dominic Harris, unless we get a surprising turnaround, he would be a key candidate to also be leaving for UCLA and going to the portal. The guys who have redshirted, Eric Franey, Brandon Williams, Devin Williams. Cronin was talking about them in his presser, saying Devin Williams has dealt with a little bit of an injury, been sick. That Brandon Williams, similar thing, and that Eric Franey's been the healthiest and been getting a lot of run at practice. All right. So any of these guys, say Brandon Williams, get a little more athletic, he can maybe fit as the oversized 3. But if you bring back both Daly Jr. and Bilodeau, do you want those guys in the lineup? Devin Williams, well, that adds another big to UCLA's repertoire. You mix in Eric Franey, another guard. Is Cronin expecting 1 or 2 of these guys to leave, or is this just a backup plan where he's like, you guys didn't develop in your year of training, but you also didn't blow a year of eligibility, right? That's the blessing and the curse. Did you spend a year getting an academic education for a year or 2 at UCLA, but limited playing time? Also some NIL potential? Certainly. So those are the guys, even though they're redshirting and they're staying, you never know. It's like, hey, you sat there, you got through the UCLA strength and conditioning program, you learned how to play defense probably a lot better than if you were anywhere else other than the Mick Cronin intense defensive workout. Those are guys who could possibly leave. So the lack of the recruits, it's concerning, although I think UCLA's gap next year isn't going to be the center position. It's going to be the 3. And some of the guys out there could fill that role, either oversized or undersized. And with them having 3 current players who could redshirt, or are redshirting and could come back next year, any one of them could play a different role, which shifts the lineup into either a super big or a super small lineup. Because the Bruins could go back with Dylan Andrews, Sky Clark, you move Daly to the 3, you move Bilodeau to the 4, flip-flop, and then Mata to the 5. And that's how you roll. Or maybe you bring Sebastian Mack as the 3, or you shift one of those guys out to the 3. Go heavy guard. You mix in with the 4s, Bilodeau and Daly Jr. And then next thing you know, with Mata and Kyle, this is still a lineup that I think is good. After a year playing together, would have some similar expectations to what UCLA had after they brought all those guys back up to the Final Four, right? You brought a lot of these players back. After a year or 2, they had big expectations and eventually won the Pac-12 conference. UCLA now in the Big Ten. If they go on a run in March, if they do, the expectations will be sky high in 2025 to 2026. There's already an expectation of improvement from last year's team to this year's team, and there has been. And there have been some highest of highs and some lowest of lows. Still a lot of youngsters, new guys on the block coming in where Cronin doesn't believe his team has reached its full potential. But if you're clutch, you lean on and rest on your principles of playing tough-minded Cronin defense, make some shots, make some free throws. And as Cronin says, if they turn it over 5 times or less, 3 times or less, they'll be cutting down the nets. They will be cutting down the nets. So clean basketball in these next couple of weeks are crucial for UCLA's NCAA tournament hopes and what they're going to look like recruiting. Because if it goes bad and they're a first-round bounce, then they're going to pick up their class of 25 recruiting via the portal, unlikely, or maybe last-ditch efforts to get a late signee, just how they got Trent Perry, the McDonald's All-American, to come to UCLA. Concerning that they have no commits from the high school ranks? Yes, but do expect UCLA to get a big 2026 or 2 2026 5-star, 4-star commits. That is where Cronin will try and make his mark into recruiting, because you're going to lose some of these guys. You need to refill the roster, or next year, they just don't need to do it as much. The turnover from last year to this year was significant, forcing him to go shopping, and he got the money he needed, right? He got the allowance, the NIL money, the NIL opportunities is really how it should be said. This next year, doesn't need to do it. They already have what they need to build to be a complete, more than complete Big Ten contender. Although some of you might disagree with what's coming back. Are they good enough? I think they're better than good enough with what they're bringing back, potentially. That doesn't mean everybody's going to stay and everybody's not going to leave. That would be absolutely crazy to think that they're all going to stay. But at this moment, UCLA has a plan and a reason, and it shouldn't be as concerning that they don't have a current class of 25 high school commit. If the same trend happens into 2026, though, then we got to ask Cronin, what are you doing here? For now, got to rule on the Bruins for a deep March Madness run. And that can help their future a lot. Speaking of a deep March Madness run, the UCLA women, we're talking about their schedule. We're talking about a forfeit win they were issued. And hey, even took on Wisconsin, which we won't go in depth, while we also talk about Lauren Betts and maybe her candidacy for Big Ten Player of the Year alongside Juju Watkins. Next, on Locked On UCLA. Welcome, everybody. Final segment of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. And hey, we're getting excited for the UCLA women's basketball tournament. Why? Because they're basically the number one team in the country. They're number 2 in the rankings, number 2 in everybody's eyes. They're number 1 in our hearts, and they're certainly the number 1 team, the best team, the deepest team, the most talented team at a lot of these spots. Now, will they have the resolve to overcome last year's Sweet 16 heartbreak, or can they get to the Final Four? We'll find out. But now, Lauren Betts, who has become a superstar, right? Forgotten about, coming from Stanford to UCLA, and then boom, fantastic. Janiah Barker, who has had some great moments and been a much-needed depth piece, bringing a unique skill set that just not many players have in the women's college basketball game. A taller guard that can handle the basketball, hit tough contested shots, rebound, block shots. There's just not a lot of Janiah Barkers out there, which made her one of the highest-ranked recruits in the same class that brought Kiki Rice, Lauren Betts, and Barker all to college basketball. And all 3 of those in the same class are coming to UCLA and are at UCLA and contributing. You mix in Tamia Gardner, who's had some big moments, including some clutch shots. And finally, Kiki Rice's high school signees that have turned into 2 to 3 year Bruins, Jaquez. You mix in London Jones. Those players have turned into solid, not just role players, but contributing big-time members of the UCLA team this year. Add in the likes of, UCLA has Dugalich, who's become a nice veteran presence in the starting lineup. Elena Arnasalo, Kendall Dudley, that provided big minutes for the Bruins against Iowa over the weekend. And next thing you know, the UCLA women are one of the deepest teams, which what they can do, bringing next year Charlize Ledger-Walker, who in my mind was probably the best transfer portal addition you could get. But unfortunately, she tore her ACL, hurt her knee against UCLA when she single-handedly basically upset the Bruins as a Washington State Cougar, taking the Bruins down in Paul Pavilion. And also took them down in the Pac-12 tournament championship game, carrying her Cougars in the year prior to an NCAA tournament, an unlikely NCAA tournament, an upset underdog run in 2023. Now, she's sitting out, and this UCLA team has to lean on the likes of Lauren Betts. They took on an undersized team that was going to get overwhelmed in Wisconsin. That's generally how the Bruins played. In this episode, I'm not going to go in depth about this game. The next episode, I'll go more in depth into how UCLA played versus Wisconsin. But I'm also going to lean in what's another topic of conversation here. UCLA having to play Wisconsin, going from Los Angeles, flying to Madison for a midweek, coming back, going to Iowa, going to Wisconsin, and then coming back to play USC in the biggest game of the season so far. That could change the seeding. That could change the complexities, right? Sometimes you're like, dude, you just got to beat a big team on a big stage. But how you get there, the path, some of these games, the travel miles logged, when, where, and how can make a difference. And USC, they made their Iowa trip early. They also had to take them on during the Caitlin Clark retirement ceremony, the Jersey retirement ceremony, and they took their loss. They have their couple of losses, but they get to rest and not to go anywhere to Los Angeles. They stay in LA and then travel to Westwood on Saturday or Friday, whatever day it is. UCLA, Midwest, get home. And USC has no game for 4 to 5 days. I don't think that's the fairest model. It's going to be the super battle between Lauren Betts and Juju Watkins, where the Bruins have to make sure she does not go supernova from 3 in the first part of that game. And to add on one more thing for both the UCLA and USC teams, remember that postponed Northwestern game? Well, both the UCLA Bruins and the USC Trojans were awarded forfeit wins because it makes no sense at this moment to play that game. There's no way Northwestern would beat either UCLA or USC. They were the ones that canceled their trip, while Penn State still came out and played USC, played UCLA at the Walter Pyramid, and then Penn State went home and ended up upsetting a top 10 Ohio State team, which gave them their first loss in Big Ten play. Weird how it works out. But UCLA is getting a forfeit win against Northwestern. So they get a win. It's not going to affect the standings. Not that it ever was. UCLA and USC are the two top teams in the Big Ten standings, the national rankings, the national seeds. We're all going to come down to who wins the 2 or best of 3 UCLA SC series in the Big Ten regular season. This year, I expected both teams to win at home again, and I expect UCLA to win the Big Ten tournament. That's not if Juju Watkins has something to say about it, or if Lauren Betts has something to say about it. Whoever wins this game or 2, I'm expecting them to play again in the Big Ten tournament in a week, then that will be the team that gets the 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. I don't see a world where what's happened so far, both teams get a 1 seed. It would take UCLA beating USC and then both teams playing a double overtime Big Ten championship game. And then everybody else getting upset in their conference tournaments. Only way. Until then, UCLA, USC are on a collision course. And we'll talk more Sarah Williams versus Lauren Betts, UCLA, Wisconsin, in the next Locked On UCLA episode. But just know the Bruins beat down the Badgers. Stop making us sweating it out. We don't have to sweat out. We don't have to worry about it. And the big game next is the Battle of Los Angeles, which will change UCLA's trajectory from a 2 seed back to a number 2 team in the country to the number 1 team in the country that we know they are. And until then, hands up, Bruins fans. It's an 8 clap time. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA. Fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.